This animation shows the train movements leading up to the accident that occurred in Chatsworth, California on September 12, 2008. It is based on data obtained from the Metrolink Dispatch Center, wayside signal equipment, and locomotive video and event recorders, as well as an assessment of the physical damage to the track. In the lower right, you can see the Metrolink train in orange as it approaches the signal at Control Point Burnson. In the upper left, you can see the Union Pacific train in white as it approaches the signal at Control Point Davis. You will note that once a train passes a signal and enters the next block, that signal will turn red. The Union Pacific train is traveling about 47 miles per hour as it passes Control Point Davis on a green, clear signal indication. As the Metrolink train approaches the signal at Burnson, the train is traveling about 68 miles per hour. The Metrolink train engineer correctly calls out flashing yellow Burnson over the radio. This signal is an advance approach, which tells the engineer to proceed and be prepared to stop at the second signal. As the Metrolink train passes the Burnson signal, the engineer begins to reduce the train speed. At this point, the Union Pacific train enters a tunnel. Just before the Metrolink train arrives at the Chatsworth station, it passes a solid yellow approach signal at 4:18:41 p.m., which tells the engineer to proceed and be prepared to stop at the next signal. There is no recording of the engineer calling out this signal or any other signal that follows. By this time, the engineer has reduced the train speed to about 48 miles per hour. The Metrolink train stops at Chatsworth Station for about 57 seconds, allowing passengers to exit and board the train. About this time, the Union Pacific train is in a tunnel approaching a double yellow signal, 4426. This is an approach diverging indication, which means to proceed and be prepared to divert off the main track at the next signal, which would be into the siding at Control Point Topanga. At 4:20:07, the Metrolink engineer moves the throttle to the number 2 position and releases the train brake. Phone records indicate that the Union Pacific train conductor sends an outgoing text message about the same time that his train passes signal 4426. As the Metrolink train approaches Devonshire Street, the engineer activates the locomotive bell for 42 seconds to warn the public. He also sounds the horn for 11 seconds before reaching the Devonshire Street grade crossing. About 4:21:03, phone records indicate that the Metrolink engineer receives a text message as the train continues to accelerate. 20 seconds later, the engineer activates the bell for 19 seconds, then sounds the horn for the Chatsworth Street grade crossing. The Metrolink train is now traveling about 52 miles per hour. There is a speed restriction of 40 miles per hour in the upcoming curve. The engineer rapidly moves the throttle from number 8 to 5, then 6, then 7, back to 3, and finally to 4. He applies a brake application and train speed begins to decrease. The Metrolink train passes the signal at Topanga. It is displaying a red stop indication. Phone records show that by 4:22:01, the engineer has sent a text message in response to the message he just received. The Metrolink train operates through the track switch at Topanga, which was lined for the Union Pacific train to enter the siding. At 4:22:23 p.m., the trains collide in a 6-degree curve. The trains were visible to each other in the curve for only about 5 seconds. Event recorder data indicate there was no braking on the Metrolink train, but the emergency brakes on the Union Pacific train were activated about 2 seconds before the collision. The Metrolink train was traveling about 42 miles per hour, and the Union Pacific train was traveling about 41 miles per hour at the time of impact. All recorded data and physical evidence in this accident are consistent with the Metrolink train failing to stop at the red signal at Topanga and continuing along the main track that was reserved for the Union Pacific train.
Meanwhile, authorities are now confirming the engineer had been text messaging the day of the accident. How could it happen? How did two trains end up on the same track at the same time? It's a question that has investigators taking a much closer look at the actions of the train's engineer, Robert Sanchez. Meanwhile, authorities are also releasing some of the 911 calls from those caught up in the tragedy.
Ma'am, is that a train versus another train or train versus a vehicle?
Train versus another train. People are bleeding and hurt here.
Moments after the crash, the calls flooded dispatchers, some from nearby residents, but most from those on board the Metrolink commuter.
They're telling us move back because it might be a possible explosion from the freight train.
Okay, you said the back car is pretty much mangled.
Looks like it's completely destroyed. I bet you're going to have a lot of fatalities there.
Among those killed, the engineer Robert Sanchez. Investigators are now confirming he had been using his phone to text message on that Friday, but they won't say exactly what time. In June, there was another train accident in the Bay Area. 16 people were hurt, and texting may have also played a role. State authorities are currently looking at new regulations to try and deal with the problem. Robert Sanchez had also been working a split shift that day, which could have led to fatigue. Early on in the probe, a Metrolink spokesperson confirmed that Sanchez had run a red signal.
Okay, who was that screaming?
That's a person who was in a wheelchair who flew down the stairs from the top down to the bottom.
25 people died in the crash, dozens more were hurt, and now increasingly the focus of investigators is on the engineer and what he did or didn't do moments before the two trains collided.